Part 12. Being a Bug in a Survival Game. Author, Kuanke. Chapter 113. With the conscience of heaven and earth, Sotinyu didn't want to do anything. But she remembered that her singing could hypnotize her, and wanted to sing a piece to Chin-Chi so that the latter could have a good sleep. I was afraid of affecting the fat man, so I asked people to stay away. Thinking like this, Sotinyu leaned close to Chin-Chi's ear. When the eyes are unable to see, the sensitivity of the other senses of the body is amplified. Chin-Chi could clearly feel the warm and soft touch covering his eyes, making him feel slightly uncomfortable. Chin-Chi hadn't realized anything yet when he heard what Sotinyu said to Fatty. Until the little head rubbed against his right shoulder, the girl's warm breath lightly poured on the exposed neck, and his hands on his thigh subconsciously clenched into fists. At this time, a soft voice sounded in my ears. Chin-Chi, let me sing you a song and you will fall asleep soon. Regardless of whether he responded or not, the girl began to hum a little tune in his ear. Little rabbit, be good. Close your eyes obediently. Little rabbit, be good. Sleep well. There seems to be a power in this song that can calm impetuousness, forget worries, forget everything, relax your mind, and immerse yourself in a carefree land. After Sotinyu hummed for half a minute, he stopped and then carefully put down his hand. Chin-Chi fell asleep. Sotinyu looked at the sleeping face in front of him and smiled silently. Copy Day 4, morning. Chin-Chi woke up. Brother Chin, you're awake. Next to him, the fat man who was woken up by Sotinyu just before dawn was doing nothing. He caught a glimpse of Chin-Chi waking up from the corner of his eye and lowered his voice, Boss, she is so strong. Liang just fell asleep. Chin-Chi turned his head and glanced at Sotinyu who was sleeping next to him. Then, he moved gently and stood up slowly. He walked to the fat man and spoke in a lower voice than usual, I'm going out, take care of her. Okay, okay. Chin-Chi took the elevator and left the prison. Chin-Chi basically walked through the floors that were not within the restricted conditions yesterday. Today he plans to visit other floors. Chin-Chi first went to the 8th floor underground and came to an unmanned locker room according to his memory. After a while, Chin-Chi walked out of the locker room wearing a prison worker's overalls, walked into the elevator again, and pressed the floor number 2. The 3rd and 4th floors underground are the employee dormitories, where there are the most people during the day. Chin-Chi has no idea about that place for the time being. Ding! The elevator door opened, and there were several prison workers waiting for the elevator standing outside. Chin-Chi lowered his head and quickly walked out of the elevator. After walking around on the 2nd underground floor, becoming familiar with the route and layout of this floor, Chin-Chi was also secretly observing the person suspected of being Captain Chris and the room in the captain's office. But this is obviously just a large storage warehouse, divided into different areas. Some are granaries, some are fruit and vegetable warehouses, and some are feed warehouses. Chin-Chi found the staircase and went up to the underground floor. People in the underground coliseum rarely use the stairs, only the elevator. Chin-Chi walked up this flight of stairs without encountering anyone. The underground floor is a parking lot, where there are some large trucks specially used to pull goods and prison vehicles used to transport wild animals. In addition, there are also some more glamorous cars. At this time, a rolling shutter door in the parking lot opened upwards, and a black RV slowly drove in. Chin-Chi hid his figure immediately, and then turned his attention to the luxurious RV. After the car stopped, the door opened and 4 men got out one after another. The middle-aged Mediterranean man came down last, and the other 3 people all habitually focused on the former. It seemed that the Mediterranean man was vaguely in the lead, with polite and ingratiating smiles on their faces. Being a Bug in a Survival Game. Author, Kuanke. Chapter 114. Oh dear Mr. Chris, you are finally back. An elevator door opened, and Smita, the host of the night show, came out. With a warm face on her face, Smita put on a formal suit and gave the Mediterranean man a big hug. "Is that person Chris?" Chin-Chi's eyes flashed slightly, and she hid in the corner near the stairs, relying on several trucks to hide her figure, and continued to eavesdrop on the conversation of several people. "Smita, long time no see." After the hug, the polite Chris said with a smile, "If I remember correctly, it's still the time for the 7 days of beast fighting show, right?" "Of course, Mr. Chris, it's almost the 4th night now," Smita said, as if thinking of something bad. Her tone was slightly annoyed. "It's just that in the middle there was a slight accident, and the feedback from the audience for this beast fighting show was not as enthusiastic as the previous month." Chris' smile faded. "What's going on?" As he spoke, he took off the black gloves on his hands and threw them to an accompanying assistant. "Go in first, and I'll chat with you later." Smita opened the elevator, and several people entered the elevator one after another. Chin-Chi came out from the corner after seeing the elevator door completely closed. Approaching the elevator door and glancing sideways, the number of floors descending was displayed next to the elevator. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. The elevator didn't stop until the 11th floor, the lowest underground floor. Chin-Chi's eyebrows relaxed slightly. Chris went to the 11th floor. The 11th underground floor is most likely the accommodation or office area of Captain Chris. This trip has yielded quite a harvest. It's time to go back. Chin-Chi pressed the elevator button and waited for the elevator to rise. At this time, the door of an elevator not far away opened specifically for pulling goods. 2 prison workers were pushing a large cart with more than a dozen corpses piled on it. The faces of some corpses looked familiar, and Chin-Chi recognized them as the corpses of slaves who died last night. The 2 corpse-carrying prison workers carried the body into a truck with stinky faces. Chin-Chi had no place to hide, but he was wearing work clothes and his back was slightly turned towards the person. The 2 prison workers glanced at him and ignored Chin-Chi. After carrying the body, they locked the carriage. The elevator door opened. Chin-Chi walked into the elevator, turned around, and saw the truck leaving the parking lot. When Chin-Chi returned to the prison, Sotingyu had also woken up. Chin-Chi saw the girl greeting 022 cordially. The latter was lying on the haystack and did not dare to move his buttocks. "Chin-Chi, you're back." Sotingyu caught a glimpse of Chin-Chi's figure out of the corner of his eye. His eyes brightened slightly, and he immediately gave up the idea of continuing friendly exchanges with 022. Chin-Chi said and then told Sotingyu and Fatty about the harvest of the strip. "Wow, have you met that Captain Chris?" Sotingyu blinked her eyes, feeling excited at the thought that she would soon be able to get the key to the collar. Chin-Chi calmly analyzed, "The situation on the 11th floor is still unclear. If you really want to go down to find the key, you must be prepared to escape from the underground coliseum at any time after being exposed. It's the 4th day now. If we fail to escape here within 7 days, we will fail." The fat man sounded worried. Chin-Chi turned to look at the fat man and said, "I have an idea on how to escape." "What idea?" "Brother Chin, have you thought of a way?" Chin-Chi didn't deny it, but he didn't nod either. Instead, he said, "There is something I need to know about. Call 022 here first." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Being a Bug in a Survival Game. Author, Kuan-K. Chapter 115. Because of Chin-Chi's words, Sotingyu and Fatty dragged the already pitiful 022 over. What else do you want to do?" 022 spoke weakly, with a look of decadence on his face. "Brother, don't be nervous, I just want to ask you something." Sotingyu chuckled. 022 was unable to complain, you say. Qin looked at 022 and asked, the underground coliseum will transport the corpses of failed performers every night. Where will the corpses be transported? Oh, you're asking this. 022 glanced at Qin strangely, of course it's the suburbs outside the West City Gate. There is a mass grave there. Will the body not be buried or cremated? Qin asked again. 022 shook his head, I've never heard of it. They are all transported to mass graves and thrown directly on the ground. Because there are many corpses there, some jackals and vultures in the wild like to hang out in that area. After 022 finished speaking, he hesitated for a moment, then asked tentatively, you are not from the Beast City? Aren't you wanderers? The three of them looked at each other, feeling a little unexpected but also reasonable. In the past few days, they caught 022 and asked him so many questions. Some of them should be well known to everyone in the trapped Beast City. Anyone who is not a fool can detect something wrong. Sutingyu looked calm and glanced at 022, why do you care so much? Qin looked at Sutingyu, I'm done asking. Sutingyu understood. Fat man, drag him back. The fat man stood up and said, hey, okay. No. You just throw it away after asking it? You haven't answered my question yet. 022 rose up to resist, but was naturally suppressed ruthlessly by Sutingyu, and finally the fat man dragged him away like garbage. After it was done, Sutingyu asked Qin, the method you mentioned is that we pretend to be corpses and go out? It's difficult to hide the heartbeat, pulse, and breathing. The most we can do is hold our breath. The fat man suddenly seemed to remember something and said cheerfully, wait a minute, I have the fake death medicine. Sutingyu's eyes widened in surprise. Qin also looked at the fat man. Being looked at directly by the two men at the same time, the fat man scratched his head in embarrassment. After clearing the dungeon of 2 heavens of ice and fire, I drew a box of 5 fake death pills. After taking it, within half an hour, my heartbeat, pulse, and breathing dropped. When the living characteristics disappear, the user's perception of the outside world remains. Qin, are there any side effects? The fat man nodded, yes. If you are forcibly awakened within half an hour, it will cause temporary brain failure. If the normal drug effect ends, you will fall into a period of weakness for half a day. After Sutingyu heard this, he was amazed that Fatty could win any treasure. Thinking of this, Sutingyu couldn't help but feel a little sour. Snort. This bastard game must be jealous of this fairy who is kind and cute, loved by everyone, and has flowers blooming, so she deliberately punished her. The fat man asked, Brother Qin, are we looking for an opportunity to pretend to be corpses and escape? It's not us, Qin said quietly. Ah. What do you mean? The fat man couldn't react. Qin spoke slowly, you should pretend to be a corpse first and then wait for us outside the city. That's right, Qin and I will stay here first. After we find the key, we will go out to find you. Sutingyu thought for a moment and understood Qin's intention. The situation on the 11th floor underground was unknown, so Qin was mentally prepared to be exposed and escape immediately. It's not a big problem to escape with Sutingyu. But adding a fat guy, well, it's a bit challenging. The fat man belatedly realized that he might have been disliked. Dear friends. Love you to death. The editor is here to inform you that one round of PK has passed. I'm so happy that I passed the round Tuesday, that is, today, the second round of PK begins. It lasts for 3 days and the competition is more intense. I hope you little cuties can follow up, vote, comment and be active. The exam is today. I will give you more updates after the exam. It may be a bit late to add more updates. Be sure to remember to vote for me, okay? Being a bug in a survival game. Author, Kuanke. Chapter 116. The fat man, who knew how much he weighed, could only nod and agree, okay, but when will I pretend to be a corpse? Moreover, he has seen corpses, but he has never pretended to be a corpse. No practical experience at all. This has already touched upon fat people's blind spots in knowledge. For the first time, Fatty, who thought he had enough life skills, realized deeply and clearly that there is no limit to learning and there is no end to learning. Qin-Chi and Sutingyu looked at each other silently, and the former spoke first, "Tonight may be an opportunity. Yes, Qin-Chi is here to ensure that you, Fatty, will not be seriously injured. As for your acting skills, it's up to you." Sutingyu patted Fatty on the shoulder, as if he was very optimistic about you. The fat man blinked, then, "What exactly should we do?" Sutingyu's dark eyes rolled around, and the corners of his mouth slowly curved. "Hey, Fatty, as long as you get off the stage when the time comes, you can perform as if you can't afford to be seriously injured and only have one breath left. As soon as you return to the prison, while the prison guards are still there, you take the fake death drug, making the prison guards think you are cold and carry you away. When the body is transported early tomorrow morning, you can take another fake death potion and you can go out. As for the week period when the medicine has finished taking effect, it is not a problem to simply raise your hand and walk." Furthermore, Fatty still had several life-saving props that were of no use. The fat man thought about it for a while, but he still felt unsure, so he just dragged Qin-Chi to rehearse the script and lines for tonight's performance several times. He was very nervous. Qin-Chi had no choice but to cooperate. When it was time to eat, the three of them ate slowly with the newly obtained lunch boxes and tableware, while the others could only grab and gnaw with their hands, gobbling them down. 1900 hours in the evening. The fourth night of the show is here. The auditorium was still packed with people and the crowd was buzzing. "I heard that leader Chris will attend the show tonight." "Really?" "That's right, my nephew saw Captain Chris' exclusive RV driving into the Coliseum during the day. At the stand, the prison worker brought all the slaves, including those who had performed last night. He said with a cold face, Captain Chris said that everyone should have fun together. This is a gift given to you." When Sutingyu heard this, he couldn't help but curl his lips. Hypocritical sounding. If everyone is really having fun together, why doesn't Chris, the leader of the group, come on stage to perform together? Only the lives of slaves will be used to perform this kind of performance. But except for the players, other slaves showed moved expressions. Some slaves even knelt down immediately, kowtowed in the direction of the beast fighting platform, kissed the ground, and muttered something. "Thank you to the kind leader Chris." At this time, the benevolent Captain Chris had arrived at the highest hidden stand. The quality of the tributes this month is good, and there will be 44 more on the fourth night. Captain Chris glanced at the documents handed over by his assistant, and a strange light flashed in his eyes. "Yes, sir." The assistant bowed and said in a respectful tone, "Sir, there are several tributes in there that are very good." Leader Chris closed the file and said, "Well, let's watch this night's performance first." On the fighting stage, a group of slaves had already begun to climb up. Whenever they see a slave with a broken arm or leg, the audience cheers even more enthusiastically. After a few groups, Qin-Chi and Fatty came on stage. "Fat man, come on." Sutingyu blinked and made a cheering gesture. The fat man swallowed his saliva and forced himself to calm down. "Okay boss, no problem boss. Let's go." Qin-Chi said. "I feel relaxed after taking the exam." More updates. Please vote. It was a dark and windy night, so I secretly took out a kitchen knife. Robbery, hand over the tickets. Being a bug in a survival game. Author, Kuanke. Chapter 117. The two were brought to the fighting stage, and when the audience saw Qin-Chi, they burst into excitement. "It's him. It was the slave who killed the crocodile. As the only slave who has killed a beast on the spot, Qin left a very deep impression on the audience. As soon as he appeared on the scene, he was recognized. Chris, who had never seen Qin kill a crocodile with his own eyes, was a little surprised when he saw the audience's extremely enthusiastic reaction. "What's going on?" The assistant on the side responded promptly, "Sir, among the two slaves performing on the stage now, the handsome slave is the only one who has killed pets so far." "Huh? That's it?" Chris looked surprised, and he understood why the audience was so excited, and immediately showed an elusive smile. "Since he has the ability to kill pets, go and arrange for number 5 to come on stage." When the assistant heard this, surprise appeared in his eyes, and he bent down and said, "Okay, sir." On the fighting stage, Shimada was a little surprised when he received the news temporarily, but he quickly adjusted his expression. "Gentlemen and ladies, tonight's performance is a big surprise. Use your warm cheers to welcome our pet number 5, on the field." As soon as the word number 5 came out, the audience seemed to fall into some kind of crazy excitement, and the cheers were like waves, rising one after another. The fat man followed Qin closely. "Brother Qin, why do I have an ominous premonition? What is this no 5? Qin didn't reply. His eyes were fixed on the cage that was pushed up by 4 prison workers with the help of a cart. The boxy cage was 5 meters high, and the iron bars were wrapped in a thick black cloth, making it impossible to see what beast was locked inside. But one thing is certain, this is a big guy. Hiss, hiss. A creepy sound came from inside the black cloth. The animal trainer lifted the black cloth and revealed the true face of the big guy in the iron cage. "ID mother," Fatty couldn't help but exclaimed after just one glance. Inside, there is actually a giant python. Hiss, hiss. In the stands, Sotingyu's eyes narrowed slightly when he saw the giant python. Pythons are large reptiles, with a common body length of 3-5 meters, and the one on the fighting stage is so huge that it almost fills the entire iron cage, and its body length is definitely more than 14 meters. The snake head of the giant python is smaller, with dark brown spear-shaped spots on the back of the head and neck, yellow and white on the head and abdomen, large black-edged clouded leopard-like markings on the back and sides of the body, yellow and white on the body and abdomen, and smooth and ridgeless body scales. Hiss, hiss. The giant python slowly moved its body. It was not like an ordinary python crawling. Instead, the front half of its body was always standing high, and only the back half of its body was twisting forward. The pair of cold-blooded vertical pupils stared coldly at Qin and Fatty in front of them, as if they were looking at dead lambs waiting to be slaughtered, filled with cold bloodthirsty murderous intent. Qin, who was on the beast fighting stage, looked calm and was thinking about the information about the giant python in his mind. Pythons are generally good at climbing. When hunting, they will crawl slowly. The moment they approach the prey, they bite it quickly, then wrap their bodies around the prey to death, flatten it into a long strip, secrete saliva, and swallow it whole, without chewing it. A few years ago, Qin and his comrades encountered an 8-meter-long giant python while on a mission in the rainforest. Although pythons look cold-blooded and ferocious, in the real world, they are actually protected animals and are not allowed to be hunted by humans at will. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Being a Bug in a Survival Game. Author, Kuan-Ke. Chapter 118. Therefore, Qin at that time, even though he was fully equipped with weapons, did not fight to the death with the giant python, but chose to retreat strategically. At that time, because there were so many of them, it was difficult to mess with them, so the python also retreated. But now in this dungeon, Qin can no longer take care of so much. Moreover, the giant python in front of him, from beginning to end, gave Qin-Chi an indescribable and eerie feeling in his heart. However, Qin-Chi is certain of one thing. The giant python has regarded them as prey and has murderous intentions. It is even more difficult to deal with than the python he met in the rainforest. Thinking of this, Qin-Chi didn't even look back, his eyes were fixed on the giant python's every move. "Fat man, the plan has changed. You have to save your life tonight." "Ah, my life," the fat man hid behind Qin-Chi. When he heard this, he was confused. "Then, what about you, brother Qin?" Qin Kuwei narrowed her deep pupils and looked up at the snake pupils full of blood and murderous intent. The former's eyes showed no emotion at all, and he just said calmly, "I'm here to buy time and find an opportunity." By the way, the fat man shook his thighs and asked in a trembling voice. Hiss. At this time, after the giant python was untied from the heavy iron chains on its body, before the host could say anything, it suddenly ran away and crawled towards the two of them. "Back off," Qin-Chi, who had been staring at the giant python, shouted in a low voice, reminding the fat man who was stunned on the spot, but he walked towards the giant python step by step. When he was about 10 meters away from the giant python, Qin-Chi suddenly increased his speed and ran towards the behemoth in front of him. 7 meters. 6 meters. 5 meters. Hiss. The giant python with a body as heavy as a truck raised its front body, and the snake's head was taut, like a crossbow ready to go. Its murderous intent was revealed, and its cold snake eyes were fixed on the prey in front of it. Fierce. Plunge out. Almost at the same time, Qin-Chi, who was maintaining his running momentum, suddenly stopped. As his steps staggered, his figure quickly deviated from his original straight running trajectory. It seemed like a slight difference, but Qin-Chi escaped the python's first impact without any damage. A trace of annoyance flashed in the giant python's eyes, and it turned the snake's head midway, driving the upper part of the snake's body, opened its mouth again, leaned over, and bit Qin-Chi. "Bite him! Bite him to death!" The audience screamed arrogantly and wildly. The huge, cold, and bloody iron cage cut off any chance of escape. Whether they were slaves or beasts, they could only be reduced to trapped beasts for the audience's entertainment. The fat man, who was shrinking his head at the edge of the fighting arena and trying his best to lower his sense of presence, listened to these pervasive crazy shouts and felt out of breath for a while. His little heart was beating incessantly. His mouth was trembling. "Qin brother, come on. The giant python's second attack comes instantly and is terrifyingly dangerous." Qin-Chi didn't have time to think about the pros and cons, as his greatest instinct and muscle memory completely dominated his body at this moment. His knees were slightly bent, his legs suddenly exerted force, and his body instantly jumped into the air, leaping high into the air. It was actually the head of a giant python that jumped up and swooped down. In the ever-changing suspended state, Qin-Chi quickly adjusted his center of gravity and fell downwards, just about to land on top of the giant python's head. Taking advantage of the situation, Qin-Chi's eyes turned cold, he exerted force on his legs, and pressed down with a heavy stamp. Really stepped on the python's head. This move is not very harmful, but extremely insulting. Hiss. The giant python was frightened and angry, its big head swayed left and right, trying to shake the person off. Qin-Chi's figure swayed, and under everyone's gaze, he slid down the snake's back. It seems like he is about to lose his footing and fall. Being a bug in a survival game. Author, Kuan-Ke. Chapter 119. From all directions, the crazy shouts in the audience rose like waves, deafening. The audience seemed certain that the unlucky ghost on the snake's back would die. Qin-Chi's eyes were still condensed, and he controlled the speed with both hands while sliding down. When he saw a certain part of the giant python right in front of him, the right hand formed a palm, and the white and slender fingers were pressed together. For a moment, the surface of the palm seemed to be coated with a dark metallic luster, and faint black lines could be seen. Turning the palm of his hand into a sword blade, he stabbed at the estimated 7 inches of the giant python. A large piece of warm blood with a strong bloody smell sprayed on Chin-Chi's face. He couldn't spare his hands to wipe it away. The drops of blood slowly slid down the tight jawline and went deep under the collar. At this time, the entire palm of his right hand was inserted into the body of the giant python. Chin-Chi had a cold face, and with a force, his palm penetrated a little more, and slowly and forcefully stirred the flesh and blood inside the giant python. Hiss! The giant python screamed. It panicked and was in pain. It struggled and rolled desperately, trying to shake the person off. Chin-Chi's left hand also tightly grasped the wound of the giant python, and his body kept shaking with the giant python. With this force, he used the force to tear the wound bigger and bigger. At some point, the crazy cheers in the audience were silenced. All the audience looked at the scene in front of them with shock and confusion. On the edge of the fighting arena, host Shimada's hand shook twice and the microphone almost dropped to the ground. No one could have imagined that the python's thick snake skin and smooth body scales would feel more fragile than paper under Chin-Chi's hands, and could be easily punctured and torn. After being unable to throw the person off for a long time, the giant python was furious. A touch of human madness flashed in the cold snake eyes, and it began to crawl around desperately. From time to time, the entire snake body would hit the big iron cage, making a bang sound. Bang bang, a series of vibrating sounds. Once or twice, Chin-Chi failed to dodge and was thrown against the iron cage. The wound on his back that had not yet healed burst open again and began to burn, as if being burned by fire, and even a trace of blood oozed out. Chin-Chi didn't notice it at all. As soon as he had a chance to breathe, he continued to torment the giant python's wounds. However, the giant python's skin was rough and thick, and even if it was injured 7 inches, it could not be subdued for a while. The scene slowly came to a standstill. The fat man hiding on the edge couldn't live in peace. Every time he saw the giant python trying to crawl over, he would run away immediately. Ho ho! After running for a while, the fat man couldn't help but bend over, put his hands on his knees, and gasp for air. Fat man! Get out of the way! The fat man, who had just taken a few breaths, suddenly heard Chin-Chi's shout. The ground was inexplicably covered with a layer of shadow, which gradually enveloped the fat man. The fat man turned his head and looked dumbfounded. At some point, the giant python pounced towards the fat man in mid-air. The python's eyes were filled with extremely sinister cruelty, suppressing the deep undercurrent, and the desperate madness completely disappeared, as if it had never existed before. At this moment, the giant python seemed to have completely forgotten about Chin-Chi on its back, and instead opened its mouth secretly at the fat man below. "ID mother," the fat man screamed and crawled to the ground to hide. But the shadow that enveloped Fatty never faded at all. The fat man glanced back and his heart almost popped out. The huge body of the giant python has completely taken off, and with the power of its short leap, it is quickly closing the distance with the fat man. If he is caught up, even if he is not swallowed in one bite, the fat man will probably change from a meatball to a meat pie just by pressing down the entire huge body of the giant python. Being a bug in a survival game. Author, Kuan-Kei. Chapter 120. Chin-Chi, who was on the back of the snake, had already tried every means to stop it when he realized that the giant python wanted to harm Fatty. Chin-Chi pulled out his right arm that had been thrust into the python's body. This is not the 7 inches of the python, it's a little off. 7 inches is the fatal vital point of a snake. It is located below the head, above the abdomen, and roughly at the heart. If it is an ordinary snake, it is easy to judge. But this is a giant python. Just rely on the naked eye to judge for a short time. The deviation is not surprising. What really surprised Qin-Chi was the superb acting skills of the giant python, who was furious and seemed to have completely lost its mind after being poked 7 inches by him. A few thoughts only flashed through his mind, and Qin-Chi suppressed the lingering weird feeling in his heart. Grasp the back of the snake with both hands and climb up. He must provoke the python again. Transfer the hatred. The movement on the snake's back attracted the attention of the giant python, but now the giant python wanted to swallow the fat man and ignored it at all. Seeing that the giant python was about to hit the fat man, the ferocious snake's mouth had already opened wide, eager to swallow the prey in front of him. Qin-Chi made a quick decision and gave up climbing slowly step by step. He straightened up, his eyes fixed on the snake's head which was still some distance ahead. After taking a few steps forward, he jumped up without any hesitation. The giant python suddenly felt something was wrong behind him, and an inexplicable chill filled the back of his head in an instant. Finally, the giant python couldn't help but tilt its head slightly. There was a lighting lamp on the top of the iron cage, and the light spread straight downwards. A human figure blocked the light above the giant python's head, and only the figure was dim. When the giant python saw the figure that was very close at hand, the next second, his left eye socket suddenly stung. Hiss! One hand actually poked into the fragile eye socket of the giant python. Button the eyeballs inside. Stir it up. A pinch. The giant python's eyeballs were instantly crushed and blood flowed out from the eye sockets. Hiss, hiss, hiss. The sudden severe pain in his left eye was even more painful than the wound on the snake's back. At this time, the wounds on the giant python's back revealed traces of flickering black energy, but they quickly dissipated. Boom! 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 At the true 7-inch position of the giant python, a heart was beating vigorously, and traces of black energy eroded through the flesh and blood, penetrating into the heart. Boom! 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 The heart gradually stopped beating. Under everyone's horrified gaze, the giant python was suddenly attacked on the left eye, and then vomited blood non-stop. The entire body's suspended balance was broken, and it fell towards the ground of the fighting arena. Qin-Chi held the lifeless snake head and wanted to forcefully change the falling position. Bang dash in the blink of an eye, a man and a snake fell to the ground, raising a burst of dust and smoke, and even the figure of the fat man on the ground was involved. Ahem! The fat man moved his body little by little with difficulty. His body, face, hands, and feet were all covered in sticky snake blood, and he turned into a plump blood ball for a while. Footsteps sounded, someone was coming, and they stretched out their hands to pull the fat man out. Brother Qin. The fat man opened his eyes wide and recognized the person. He was about to thank him and stood up when he heard Qin-Chi whisper in his ear, "Don't move, pretend to be faint." Fatty blinked and instantly remembered the performance script from the beginning. His whole body suddenly became weak, and then he rolled his eyes and fainted. The dust and smoke dispersed. Everyone saw the scene in front of them. The huge python lay on the ground, making no sound. And beside, a person is lying down. One person stood. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Being a bug in a survival game. Author, Kuan-Ke. Chapter 121. Qin-Chi carried the unconscious fat man back to the stand. The two of them were covered in the strong smell of snake blood and directly forced many slaves back. In a corner, Yechi looked at Qin-Chi with complicated eyes and murmured to himself, "No, the props can't be used. Is it because of the 6 attributes alone, or does he have some kind of aggressive tidal aura?" The scene where Qin-Chi directly stabbed the giant python was so shocking that it directly shattered the outlook of the remaining players. It's impossible for such a powerful player to be unknown. Lao Wang, the neighbor next door, said with a solemn expression. Hearing this, Yesie's face stiffened slightly, and her mind quickly thought about whether she had offended Qin and the others severely in the past few days, and whether there was any way to make amends. The other side. Qin ignored those complicated looks, walked to Sutingyu, and put the fat man down on the ground. Sutingyu quickly offered his hand and asked in a low voice, "Are you okay?" Qin lowered his head and simply responded, "Yes." When Sutingyu heard this, he immediately felt relieved. When he looked at the unconscious fat man again, his big, watery eyes not only showed an increasingly real look of worry, but also had an imperceptible hint of amusement. Wow! I didn't expect that the fat man's pretending to be faint was so real. He seemed to be quite skilled, and there was no trace of unfamiliarity or awkwardness at all. After Sutingyu admired the fat man in her heart, she turned around and asked about Qin, "How are you?" After Qin glanced at Sutingyu, he turned his head and said calmly, "It's okay." Sutingyu raised his eyebrows slightly, and his eyes slowly moved down from Qin's face, and finally landed on the blood-stained right hand at his side. Sutingyu looked at it carefully for 2 seconds, then suddenly stretched out his hand and grabbed Qin's right wrist. Qin looked startled and did not break away immediately. He just turned to look at Sutingyu. Sutingyu pulled Qin's right hand over. After taking a closer look, he found that 1 or 2 nails on the latter's right hand were about to fall off. Especially the nail on the index finger was gone, revealing some red and swollen soft flesh. Sutingyu looked at Qin in surprise, and complained slightly, "I didn't say that you must kill the giant python, why are you working so hard? How can you delay time like this? How painful it is." As she spoke, she couldn't help but lower her head slightly, blowing gently on the wound. Qin didn't say a word, just stood silently, with his back straight, listening to the girl's intermittent complaints. The coolness that blows on his right hand from time to time can, for a brief moment, relieve the pain that has been numb to the bone. He didn't say. "It's not very painful." He seemed a little, didn't want to talk. The highest hidden stand. Chris had a deep look on his face, and his black gloved fingers gently tapped the armrest of the seat, as if there was some unknown melody. Interesting, almost perfect. Chris's eyes flashed with a hint of fanaticism. The assistant next to him was silent and bent a few degrees deeper. After Chris whispered, there was no more movement, and he quietly enjoyed the performance that followed. Near 0 o'clock, after all the performances on the 4th night were over, the surviving slaves were driven back to the prison cells by the prison workers. Sutingyu glanced at the fat man who had secretly taken the fake death drug. After exchanging glances with Qin, he rubbed his face with his little hands and his expression changed instantly. Above use. Sutingyu whimpered with water in her eyes, fat man, wake up, why are you so out of breath?" When Qin saw this scene, he turned his head slightly, made a fist with his left hand, and pressed it against the slightly raised corner of his mouth. The movement here attracted the attention of others, including the few prison workers who had not yet left the prison. Being a bug in a survival game. Author, Kuan-K. Chapter 122. A prison worker stepped forward and confirmed that the fat man's breathing, heartbeat, pulse and other vital signs showed no signs of a living person. He turned his head and nodded to the other prison worker. So, the 2 prison workers drove away Sutingyu, who was still crying nearby, and 1 person stood aside, trying to carry him away. 1 second. 2 seconds. 10 seconds later. The 2 prison workers suppressed their blushes and didn't even make a move. The scene was eerily quiet. "Ahem, you 2 come here and help me," one of the prison workers who was dragging the body asked for help. The remaining 2 prison workers also came over, and with 4 of them, they could barely lift the fat man. The fat man, who was still aware of the outside world, almost wanted to scream. 4 people pulled his 2 legs and 2 arms forcefully. Fortunately, he had a lot of fat, so the pain was not unbearable. Because it was a corpse, the prison workers didn't know how to control their strength at all, so it was pretty good if they could lift it up. Hey! Sutingyu wiped away the 2 tears that she squeezed out of her eyes, and watched the corpse leave with sad eyes. Qin-Chi watched Sutingyu's performance quietly. After thinking about it, he stretched out his left arm and fished the person out. When Sutingyu's forehead touched Qin-Chi's chest, she was slightly stunned. The back of her head was being held gently by someone's hands, and the touch coming from her forehead, well, it wasn't too hard, it seemed to be elastic. Woo-oh! A few seconds later, the kitten's whining cry sounded intermittently from Qin-Chi's chest. But except for Qin-Chi, no one noticed that Sutingyu, who should have been sad, grinned widely at the corners of his mouth, suppressing a smile until his face turned red, while doing woo-woo-woo things. Ding dong! The elevator door on the second underground floor opened, and 4 prison workers struggled to carry a body. Finally, 4 prison workers carried the body into a warehouse dedicated to morgues. Tired, so exhausted. How come such a fat slave wasn't torn to pieces by the adults' pets? That's right, this slave is so lucky. Let's go, let's go. The iron door closed, and the footsteps outside gradually faded away. After almost half an hour, when there was no other movement from outside, the corpse that was thrown on the ground suddenly widened its eyes. Tata's hands and legs, which were originally soft, became stiff. After a while, they finally returned to normal. The fat man said ouch and sat up. He felt that his body was hollowed out. He quickly took out the bread prepared in advance from the inventory and swallowed it in a few mouthfuls. This fake death drug also has the side effects of hunger, the fat man muttered softly. There were no lights on in the warehouse, so it was completely dark. The fat man put his hands on the ground and just stood up and moved a few times when he suddenly realized that something seemed to have been stepped on under his feet. The fat man took out a flashlight from his inventory and shined it on the floor. A severed hand. Oh my God! With a scream, the flashlight fell to the ground, and the light spread out and shone around the warehouse. The floor of the warehouse seemed to have been graffitied randomly and harshly by children with red paint, layer by layer, with some scraps of skin, flesh, and bones stuck to it. The stinking smell of blood clearly told the fat man that this was not paint, but blood. In addition to blood, there were also many corpses piled up in the warehouse, including slaves with collars and beasts with collars. Although he had been mentally prepared for it, the fat man still expressed his inability to accept it. He tremblingly picked up the flashlight and moved around slowly. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon on the 8th, I finally got home. I was motion sick and had a headache. After taking a shower and eating, I barely checked in for today's 2 updates. I had to go to bed and wake up to do it again. Let me tell you something, it is expected to be on the shelves this month, and the explosion you are looking forward to is more likely to come. If any little cutie has a monthly ticket, come to Kong Kong Children Vote. What?